The studio audience was laughing, every single one of them, 400 people caught in the grip of a man who could become anyone, a German surgeon, a Southern grandmother, a terrified airline pilot, simply by shifting his posture and changing his voice. And then Jonathan Winters stopped. Mid-sentence, mid-character, mid-breath, he looked directly at Johnny Carson with an expression that had nothing to do with comedy. The laughter died in sections, the front row first, then the middle, then the back, like a wave pulling away from shore. 11 seconds passed. On live television, 11 seconds without sound is a void. It is the kind of silence that makes directors reach for the cut button. But Carson did not cut. He did not speak. He sat perfectly still, his pen frozen above his note cards, and waited. Because Johnny Carson, a man who had interviewed 10,000 people, recognized something in Winters' eyes that the audience did not. He had seen it before, not on television, in a mirror. This story begins with those 11 seconds, but it does not end there. It goes back to a childhood in Dayton, Ohio. It descends into the freezing trenches of the Korean War. It walks through the doors of a psychiatric ward in 1959. It writes television history with a wooden stick in 1976. It passes the torch to a young comedian named Robin Williams in 1991. And it ends in 2013, on the day Jonathan Winters took his last breath, standing silently before an unfinished painting on an easel. I often see comments from people who didn't realize they weren't subscribed. If you enjoy the channel, please take a second to check and make sure you are subscribed. It is free, and it really helps us keep the show growing. Thank you for being part of this journey with us. To understand this story, we need to go much further back than 1976. We need to go to the year 1925, to the city of Dayton, Ohio. Jonathan Harshman Winters was born into the eye of a quiet storm. His father was an alcoholic. He walked out when Jonathan was 7 years old and never came back. His mother, Patrice, worked at a radio station. Disciplined, distant, precise. She loved her son but was afraid to show it. The boy found himself alone in a large house filled with rooms that held nothing but the silences left behind by adults. It was in those silent rooms that comedy was born. Not as applause, as survival. When he imitated different people, his mother laughed, and her laughter was the only warm sound in the house. A 7-year-old boy learned the equation fast. The real Jonathan did not get attention, but the characters Jonathan created did. What you are about to hear is drawn from the details of 2 real lives, their documented struggles, their known histories, their private silences, and imagines the conversation that the evidence of those lives always seemed to be pointing toward. The facts about Jonathan Winters are real. The facts about Johnny Carson are real. The meeting between them and what was said lives in the space between what we know and what we can feel must have been true. When Winters returned from the Korean War, he carried an invisible suitcase, the things he had seen on the front lines, the unfinished sentences of his childhood, and the noise of a mind he could not control. He started performing at small nightclubs in Dayton, a microphone, and an empty stage. He needed nothing else. He never used a script. He would take a single word from the audience and build an entire world from it. When he first appeared on Jack Parr's show, the producers were not sure what they had just witnessed. During this time, in Winters' small studio in Montecito, an easel stood in the corner. Painting was his only form of expression when he could not be on stage. The sleepless nights, the gaps between tours, the moments when words were not enough. On his canvases, the same themes appeared again and again. Solitary figures, empty rooms, shadows pressed into corners. Nobody paid much attention to the paintings. Everyone wanted the comedian. Nobody asked about the painter. But this was only the surface of the story. By the late 1950s, Jonathan Winters was the most dangerous comedian in America. Dangerous because he was uncontrollable. No talk show producer could predict what he would do. One minute he was Maude Frickert, the sharp-tongued elderly Southern lady. The next he was a German surgeon, then a bewildered airline pilot. Steve Allen's crew stood on high alert whenever he appeared. Jack Parr called him the funniest and most frightening man on television. But behind the stage, the storm was growing. The same mechanism that made Winters a genius was consuming him. The characters began to surface not just on stage, but in daily life. He would shift into Maude Frickert while talking to a waiter, unable to see the worry in his wife Eileen's eyes. His sleep had collapsed. Alcohol became the only way to slow his mind, but instead of slowing things down, it made everything more chaotic. One night in the spring of 1959, he was in San Francisco, walking past the harbor at Fisherman's Wharf, past a sailing ship moored at the dock. Something inside him snapped. Winters began climbing the rigging, at 3 in the morning alone, convinced he was someone else. The police brought him down. The next day he was admitted to a psychiatric facility. 8 months, white walls, cold tile floors, medication, and silence. Inside that clinic, Winters was forced to confront the Jonathan, who did not perform. He would describe it years later. When you strip away the characters, what is left? When the doctors gave him a brush and paint as therapy, he sat before the easel for hours. He could not speak, but he could paint. The figures on canvas were always the same: people with their backs turned, empty rooms, doors left half open. One of those doors was about to open. Winters was released in 1960. Hollywood had not forgotten him, but Hollywood's memory is short, and it is not merciful. The label had stuck. The crazy comedian. Producers loved him, but could not trust him. The question hung in the air at every meeting: what if he breaks down on stage again? Winters answered with the stage itself. In 1963, he took a role in It's a Mad, Mad, Mad World, and on Stanley Kramer's set, everyone noticed. This man had not just come back, he had come back stronger. But there was a canyon between looking strong and being strong, and Winters was walking across it like a tightrope artist. And this is where Johnny Carson enters the story. When Carson took over The Tonight Show in 1962 and first invited Winters on, something electric passed between them. Both came from the Midwest, Carson from Nebraska, Winters from Ohio. Both were quiet, withdrawn men off camera. Both knew that comedy was a mask, because both lived behind one. One of Carson's producers would recall that Carson rarely spoke to guests during commercial breaks, but when Winters came on, the two would sit together backstage, sometimes saying nothing at all. 31 times. Winters appeared on The Tonight Show 31 times. Every single time, Carson asked for no script, no briefing, no question list. He gave Winters only one thing: an empty stage and unlimited time. This was a privilege Carson extended to no other guest, because Carson understood Winters' genius did not live in control, it lived in chaos, and the most intense moment of that chaos was approaching. November 1976. Winters arrived at the NBC studio for another Tonight Show appearance, but this night was different. In the green room, Winters was quiet. The man who normally did characters even backstage was sitting motionless in his chair. There were paint stains on his hands. He had spent hours that day standing before a canvas, a small painting showing a solitary figure on a stage, facing an empty auditorium. He had been unable to finish it before coming to the studio. When one of the producers stopped by the green room, he found Winters standing at the window. "Are you all right, Jonathan?" Winters turned with that strange, displaced smile and said, "Which Jonathan?" When Carson heard about this backstage exchange, he raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He turned to his producer and gave a single instruction: no time limit. At 9 o'clock, Winters walked onto the stage, and for the first 5 minutes, it was pure Jonathan Winters magic. The audience was convulsing. The German surgeon, the bewildered pilot, Maud Frickert. The characters chased each other across the stage. Carson was bent over behind his desk, laughing, his note cards long abandoned. Then, during a transition between characters, Winters picked up a wooden stick from the desk, an ordinary prop left over from the previous segment, and for 20 minutes he built a world out of that stick. A fishing rod, a sword, a violin bow, a baseball bat, a baby's bottle. 400 people in the studio forgot how to breathe, but nobody, not even Carson, was prepared for the next 11 seconds. It was the 17th minute of the wooden stick performance. Winters paused for a moment and gripped the stick with both hands as though searching for something inside it. Then he set it slowly on the desk and transitioned into a new character, an old man. His voice dropped, his shoulders caved, his eyes locked onto a distant point. The audience laughed. Another character was coming, but this time it did not come. Winters began to speak, but the sentence died halfway. His lips moved, no sound came out. Something unrecognizable surfaced in his eyes, as though the stage lights had flickered off for a moment. And Winters was seeing not the 400 people in the studio, but something else entirely. His hands trembled slightly. 11 seconds. On live television, 11 seconds of silence is an abyss. In the control room, director Fred de Cordova was glued to the monitor. Producer Peter Lassley's hand hovered over the commercial break button. 11 seconds was one of the longest uninterrupted silences in 30 years of The Tonight Show. One of the studio cameramen would describe that moment years later. Looking through the viewfinder, he could not see any character on Winters' face. For the first time, he saw only Jonathan. Carson did not move. His pen hung suspended above the note cards. He did not look at the audience. He did not look at the producer. He did not look at the camera. He looked only at Winters. And then, very slowly, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. Winters' voice cracked. Sometimes, I forget which character I'm playing on stage, Johnny. But that's not what scares me. What scares me is that one day I'll forget my own voice off stage too. 400 people were silent. No applause, no laughter, only the hum of the air conditioning motors. Winters continued. His voice was no longer a performance voice. It was bare, unarmored, raw. In that house in Ohio when I was 7, my father walked out the door. I watched from the window. I told myself he'd come back. He didn't. That day I learned something. If you make people laugh, they stay. If you don't, they leave. Do not go anywhere. Because what happened next is something that almost never occurred in the history of The Tonight Show. Carson stood up from behind his desk. 30 years, over 4,500 episodes. Johnny Carson almost never came out from behind his desk. That desk was a shield, a physical boundary that separated the host from the guest, the professional from the human being. But that night, Carson pushed his chair back, walked around the desk, and sat on the edge of the chair beside Winters. Everyone in the studio held their breath. In the control room, de Cordova whispered at the monitor, "My God, what is he doing?" Carson said nothing for a long moment. Then he spoke in a low voice, barely a whisper. "The winter of 1971. My third marriage had ended. Every night I walked out of this studio and into that big house in Bel Air. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the dark. From the outside, everyone saw Johnny Carson, America's most beloved man. But inside there was a comedian with no audience. And do you know what a comedian does without an audience, Jonathan?" Winters looked at him. "Nothing," Carson said. "Absolutely nothing. You sit and listen to the silence." Carson's shoulders trembled, very slightly, barely caught by the camera. He looked away for a moment, clenched his jaw, then turned back to Winters. "I'm alive because of this stage too. You know that. That's why I never give you a script. Because if I give you a script, you put on the mask. And in this studio, at least one person needs to be without a mask." Tears began to slide down Winters' face. He didn't wipe them. He let them fall. And then very quietly, "Those nights when you sat alone in that house, Johnny, what did you do?" Carson paused. He took a long breath. "I watched your shows," he said. But behind those 11 seconds of silence, there was a detail that nobody knew. When Winters stood on that stage, at the exact moment he transitioned into the old man character, he heard his father's voice. Not the character's voice, his real father's voice. The last sentence his father spoke in that house in Dayton before slamming the door and walking away. "You are nothing, Jonathan." That sentence had echoed inside Winters for 50 years. Every character was an answer to it. Maude Frickert was the revenge of the loving grandmother he never had. The German surgeon was a fantasy of being in control. The bewildered pilot was the comedy of being lost. Every person Winters created was a different version of that 7-year-old boy trying to fill the emptiness his father had left behind. And there was a reason Carson understood this. Carson's father, Kit Carson, the quiet, distant man from a small Nebraska town, had never told his son, "I'm proud of you." Carson once confessed to a close friend that he did not even know if his father watched him on television. The man who made America laugh every night had never received the approval he wanted most. This was the root of the silent bond between Winters and Carson. Both were boys searching for a father under the stage lights. After the cameras stopped rolling that night, Carson walked Winters to the green room, something he almost never did. The two men sat down. The crew filtered out one by one. The studio emptied. What was said in that room over the next hour? Nobody knows exactly. But Winter's wife Eileen would later say that when her husband came home that night, she saw something on his face she had not seen before. Not peace exactly, but the lightness that comes when something finally settles into place. And there was one more thing Carson did that night. Before leaving the studio, he picked up the wooden stick that Winters had left in the green room. He put it in his desk drawer. Years later, when Carson retired and his belongings were moved to his house in Malibu, that stick was still there. The echoes of that night carried far beyond the studio walls. Before midnight, NBC received over 14,000 phone calls, viewers wanting to say thank you, wanting to share their own stories. Psychiatric associations requested the recording as educational material. Calls to mental health hotlines surged by 200% that week. What Winters had done, dropping the mask, transforming vulnerability into truth, was something no one dared to do in 1976. Men did not cry. Comedians did not break. Winters shattered all of it in 11 seconds. And Winters did not stop, could not stop. In the 1980s, a new generation discovered him as the voice of Papa Smurf in the Smurfs. Millions of children heard that voice every Saturday morning, and none of them knew that behind that warm, wise grandfather lived a man who had once searched for himself on the cold floor of a psychiatric ward. But Winters' greatest legacy was not a cartoon character. When he appeared on The Tonight Show for the last time in 1991, a young comedian sat beside him, Robin Williams. Williams called Winters "my comedy father" at every opportunity. That night, the two sat side by side, and Carson, preparing for his own retirement, gave them the stage. The improvisational duel between Williams and Winters was a meeting of two generations. But those watching closely noticed Williams looked at Winters the way a son looks at his father. And Winters, the man whose own father had walked out, returned that look for the first time. In 1999, Jonathan Winters received the Mark Twain Prize, the highest honor in American comedy. He stepped up to the podium, delivered a short speech, brought out a few characters, made the audience laugh. But the last thing he said silenced the room. Every person carries a quiet room inside them. And what matters is not how long you stay in that room, but whether you can walk out of it. Jonathan Winters passed away on April 11, 2013, at the age of 87, at his home in Montecito, quietly, in his sleep, without saying goodbye to anyone. When the family entered his studio after the funeral, they found an unfinished painting on the easel, a small canvas, a solitary figure standing on a stage, facing an empty auditorium. No spotlight, no microphone. Just a man and 400 empty chairs. The painting he had started in 1976. He had worked on it for 37 years, adding a brushstroke, leaving it, coming back months later. He never finished it. Maybe it was never meant to be finished. Robin Williams spoke at the funeral. After a few sentences, his voice wavered and he had to stop. Then he shared something Winters had once told him, that every time he walked onto a stage, he carried that 7-year-old boy with him, that he could not leave the boy behind, that he did not want to. Williams' eyes filled as he said it. 1 year and 4 months later, on August 11, 2014, Robin Williams could not walk out of his own quiet room. Johnny Carson had died 8 years before Winters, in 2005. When his Malibu home was being cleared out, they found a wooden stick in his desk drawer. Next to it, a small note card. "This stick did something magical to me, Jonathan." Beneath it, in Carson's handwriting, a single word, "Me too." If this story moved you, subscribe right now. Share it with someone who knows what it's like to carry a quiet room inside them. Drop a comment below. Tell me where in the world you're watching from. And let me ask you this, who has seen behind your mask? Who sat with you through those 11 seconds and waited without saying a word? Because somewhere right now, someone is sitting inside that silence. And maybe all they need is for someone to sit across from them.